What's up, everybody? Just want to take a quick second and let people know that I am self-supported. I now put all of my episodes on Substack for paid subscribers. I put them up early, and then 24 hours later, I release them to the public on all my platforms. I also have Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, Buy Me a Coffee, Zelle, a PO Box, and I don't think Locals, Patreon. And all of the links are in the show notes of every single episode I put out. So look forward to continuing to provide great conversations, and thank you all for your continued support. Alex, I know I have you for a limited amount of time today, so I want to jump right into it. And what's been weighing on my mind, and I want to get your thoughts on it, is I feel like in the United States right now, we're already in a civil war, but things seems like both sides right now, to me, they're arming up, and you're seeing that right now in Chicago and Portland. And I had a friend send me an article a couple days ago and describing the Antifa response and the local and state level versus the federal. I mean, they're basically giving the federal government the middle finger, saying, we don't want you here. Chicago, the mayor came out and signed an executive order. I don't even know how you do this. No ice-free zones. So if you're a private business, you can opt out, or if you're a state or local property, you're not allowed to do any type of ice setup there. And also, you're seeing, in this article talked about it, people are dressing up in like rabbit costumes and bunny costumes and squirrel outfits to, if any type of assault happens to them or if something worse, they'll be able to exploit that. And it's unbelievable. Are you seeing any of this? This episode is brought to you by McElvaney Financial Group. Their advisors bring a depth of knowledge and experience that allow them to serve their clientele with care, ensuring their financial needs are met now and in the future. Personally, I'm not saying cash is worthless, but you can see what's happening. It's worth less every year. Gold is the opposite. Click on the promo link in the show notes or go to www.mcelvaney.com/coffeeandamike.
No, I have to be honest. I haven't watched much of the footage. I'm vaguely aware of what's going on, and it's actually, I'm a little bit surprised that it's a scenario that I've been kind of predicting, but in the sense of like, I hope I'll never get to see that, and hopefully it never comes to pass. But it does seem to be, coming to pass, and Tom Longo and I talked about this many times in the past, that the United States is probably the central battlefield in this global war, because as I see it, and I think it's not terribly controversial, the clashes between the whatever this reincarnation of the British Empire that we have now, which has kind of infiltrated and co-opted the United States to carry water for it, to be its military enforcement arm, and then pretty much the rest of the humanity. And so, people perceive this as the globalists against everybody else, or the as they say, open societies versus closed societies, or liberal democracies versus autocratic regimes, and so on. But it's actually pretty much a version of the British Empire that has just kind of transformed itself after World War II, and it has, it keeps its headquarters in the city of London, but then its most important military, diplomatic, political, economic, financial asset is the United States. And in these discussions, Tom and I kind of thought, well, either they're going to do everything to keep the United States under control, which they pretty much did under the Obama administration, Clinton administration, Biden administration. And failing that, they're going to try to destroy the United States, to bring back civil war and try to partition the United States to eliminate it as a force in the world. Because if the US is under their control, then the empire is viable. If the United States changes course and joins multipolar integrations, makes nice with um, Russia, China, Iran, India, and so forth, and abandons the British system of free trade in favor of the American system of political economy, then the United States becomes a threat and a rival to them. And so, how would they do this? And, obviously, they're going to weaponize one of these groups, like Antifa, Black Lives Matter. They might use LGBT groups. I don't know. I heard there's something called Armed Queers of Lake Tahoe. Does that
I don't know that.
exist?
I don't know that one.
Yeah, I saw that there was like some kind of an organization like that, like LGBT only with weapons, weaponize the LGBT. Apparently that exists as well. And then they're going to encourage uh, parts of the governing structure to cancel loyalty to the federal government, to say like, no, we're, like you have no power here, and we're going to do things our way. And then maybe even encourage certain states to break away, to declare independence, like, I don't know, California or Texas. And it does seem now, it feels that this conflict is actually starting to take shape. And obviously, the federal government can't not react. They simply have to react. They have to um, fight back. And so what I see Donald Trump and his administration doing now is absolutely what a federal government administration has to do. This is this is their oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. And I see that a lot of people in the United States are very, very highly uncomfortable with this, because they see Trump as turning authoritarian, which is probably true. But it's not like before Trump everything was awesome and now he's spoiling it all for us. The country was already going in the wrong direction. The system was unsustainable. Um, a lot of very, very worrisome development. Authoritarianism was on the rise because we had, the British pitching some kind of an industrial censorship machine that they were presenting and selling to the Biden administration. They wanted to destroy Twitter. They're now busy taking over TikTok and other media companies. So it's not like the other side is just, flower children, uh, as they dress up in bunnies and squirrels, right, to make themselves, to make a ridiculous scene where you see Ice Agent beating up a poor little bunny. So it's not like that. These are very, very dangerous people that regard us as hackable animals, that want to pen us into these controlled smart cities, or 15-minute cities where applicable, who want to feed us crickets instead of red meat, who want to make sure we're all driving hackable electric vehicles, and so forth. So the battle is real, and I think that the government has to go authoritarian. And then I also wanted to add this. I've actually spent most of my life under undemocratic regimes. I grew up in the communist world under one-party communist rule in former Yugoslavia. And now I spend the last 30 years living in the Principality of Monaco, which is, it's a hereditary monarchy practically. And the same family, the same dynasty has been in charge for more than 700 years. And I can tell you there's no context and there's no contest. Uh, Democracies are a mess. These authoritarian regimes are well-ordered, sane societies. And that's how I've experienced them. And it's not, like they scare you from authoritarian regimes. Oh, they're going to be abusive. They're just going to, stop you on the street, throw you in jail. And it doesn't work that way. Authoritarian regimes are very, very extremely sensitive to the will of the people. And if they're abusive, they're always very vulnerable to palace intrigues. If the authoritarian leader of a country makes bad decisions, they're always vulnerable to palace coups. And in democratic societies, leaders retire and go spend more time with their families. In autocratic societies, leaders usually don't end their lives in their beds. They end up uh, assassinated or imprisoned or something like that. So, well, we're there now. This is what's happening. And if something like civil war pops up, there's going to have to be purges. And, many people may not know, but Abraham during the Civil War in 1862, Abraham Lincoln himself had to conduct massive purges in the United States because the enemy forces were infiltrating everywhere. They're in the courts, they're in the academia, they're in the local governments, they're everywhere, and they're actively sabotaging the government. They're actually actively working against it and seeking for ways to delegitimize and overthrow the ruling government. So Abraham Lincoln had to slam something like I think between 20 and 38,000 people into prison. That happened. And, if push comes to shove, you might have to do that as well today in the United States. It may seem unthinkable, but, history never ended. With that end of history, Fukuyama, that was fake news. History never ended. So all of these things that have happened in history before our times could happen again.
Also, with that though, you look at the time we're in now and the ability to create panic, right, with social media and share information, and that you can get so many people hysterical so quickly, which I think it makes matters worse. I mean, I had my friend Matt Smith on and Dave Collum last week, and we were talking about where we're at now versus even 2008, the great financial crisis. And back then Twitter wasn't relevant like it is today, X, and the ability to share information. I mean, I think that situation would have been farther worse because you could have people put out, even if it's not true, about, say, ABC Bank is on the brink. There's a run on it right now. By the time you realize that it was, fake news, it's too late. The panic is set in. And that's where we're at now with all this. Because people aren't thinking critical, they aren't thinking rational, and we're glued to our phones all day long. So, that's the other thing. And then to add to that, what's happening in Portland, Chicago, there's another No Kings protest scheduled for next Saturday here in the United States. And the federal government's shut down right now.
Yeah, that cracks me up a little bit because No King's Project. What on earth
Protest.
is that? Yeah, sorry, protest. What on earth is that? Where, where is this coming from? There seems to be to me, like when I do my research and read my history, it seems to me that the ruling oligarchies throughout history and particularly in the West today, they're obsessed with kings. And the reason for that is because in history, kings were able to check the oligarchic abuse, right? A king, if an oligarch was being abusive to the people uh, in his city, in his country, the king could set him straight because the king in the hierarchy is higher, has a bigger political has bigger political power basically. And so then 509 BC, the Roman oligarchies ended kingship, and since then, the way to get rid of somebody, it was to accuse them from seeking kingships. So if they accused anybody uh, of seeking kingship, they could get rid of him. They could assassinate him, like Julius Caesar, for example, but many others. And so if they had political opposition that they didn't like, they could just accuse them of seeking kingship, and that was that. And then they would slaughter them and probably hundreds, if not thousands, of their followers. That's how it was. And this continued. It's like it's the dark side of this celebration of liberal democracies. But what happens in these liberal democracies is there is no political power above the oligarchy. And the difference is staggering because I'll just share with you the example of Russia. Because after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the the Soviet Russia was taken over by oligarchs. And all these oligarchs were trustees of Western financial interests. And so between 1991 and 2000, when Putin came to power, you had the rule of the seven bankers, right? So you had these seven bankers who were basically in charge of the country. They were appointing prime ministers and ministers, judges, police chiefs at their discretion, at will, and they were taking them down at will. Uh, and of course, they used the country as their piggy bank, and they used the people as slave labor. And so the country pretty much fell apart. It was on the verge of collapse. The average salary in Russia was $56 a month when Vladimir Putin came to power. There was no law and order. It was one of the most corrupt countries in the world. You had rival gang shootouts on the streets of Moscow, and the military fell apart. It was just a catastrophe completely. And one of the first things that Putin did when he came to power in 2001 or 2002, he basically lined up all the oligarchs. He summoned them to a meeting at the Kremlin around this big giant round table where I think about 15 of them turned up. And he told them, okay, boys, new rules. Whatever you stole is yours. Keep it. Your property will not be nationalized, but you have to run your businesses correctly. You have to pay your taxes correctly. You have to treat your employees correctly. And you must stay out of politics. Do your business, stay out of politics. And this last thing was the most problematic for them. And so a couple of conflicts ensued. Some of these oligarchs tried to sue the government, but they lost in every case. And then in 2003, one of the oligarchs was actually thrown into prison. That was Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who was the trustee for Jacob Rothschild's interests. He's still alive. He's still trying to take power in Russia, but pretty much has been marginalized. He spent 9 years in prison, and then he was let go. I think on the pretext that his mother was unwell, and so he was let go, and he went straight to London, where I think he still lives today, even though he never learned how to speak English, which is amazing. But anyway, the the point I'm trying to make is that Russia under oligarchs was an absolute dump. It was horrifically dysfunctional. From the moment when Vladimir Putin set the oligarchs uh, on notice and told them, these are the rules, I'm above you now. I do politics, you do business, stay out of politics. And if you abuse this, the people, your business, the country, the government, well, you're going to be punished for it. And then, Mikhail Khodorkovsky was a good example of it. Well, practically from that moment on, Russia went from being a complete basket case to being, again, a superpower and very prosperous, very advanced, technologically advanced, a well-ordered society where, something like close to 90% of the people approved the president's job performance. I think something like 60 people report that they trust him. Um, Vast majority of people believe that the country is moving in the right direction. They feel happy. When they ask them, do you feel free to choose the way you want to live? A huge majority says yes. When they ask them, are you happy or decidedly happy? Vast majority says yes. And so that's the contrast of between what we call authoritarian system and our liberal democracies. The difference is that there's a sovereign that's above the oligarchy. The oligarchy is subordinate to him. Whereas in the West, in all these liberal democracies, we don't really know who rules over us. We elect presidents and prime ministers, and they come and go. The policies never change. And a president or a prime minister lining up the oligarchs and telling them this is how it's going to be from now on, and putting them in their playbox. This is unthinkable. You know, imagine a U.S. president bringing Bill Gates and Larry Ellison and Warren Buffett and all of these people and telling them, look, from now on, there's a new sheriff in town and you're going to have to behave or else. It just can't be. If they ever come together, it's usually the political class that's kowtowing to these oligarchs. Jamie Dimon, people like this. And so that's how you get places like Portland and Chicago and Philadelphia and Skid Row and all these places because the we don't really know who rules over us, and those who rule over us, they are law unto themselves. There's nobody to check their abuses, and I think that because Trump is now moving in an authoritarian direction, they're immediately, oh, he wants to be a king. So we have to have no king's protest. Even though, like in Canada, it's okay. In Canada, it's okay. You can have a king. Your prime minister that Canadian people elected can pledge loyalty to the king of Britain. And in Britain, there can be a king and everybody should revere him, right? Even American people should accept that and revere him. But in the United States, no, there has to be like this amorphous liberal democracy where, the president is completely subordinated to the oligarchy and the courts and the police and the CIA and the Congress and everybody. And I think that this is what they're afraid of. They're afraid that this is going to change under Trump. And so they're pitching these no kings protests, except, I don't think people understand the wider context about why the oligarchy is so petrified of the prospect of living under a king.
Because they feel like the tides will, and I agree with you. I mean, to me, they are the driver right now. The oligarchs or the big tech people are the drivers in everything that's happening, right? I mean, they're building the instruments to further tighten the grip on people, on the citizens.
Yes, exactly. They're afraid that their hold on the levers of power is going to loosen, that they're going to lose control, and so they want to tighten control. And well, the fact that we live under oligarchies is an empirical fact. There have been multiple academic studies of this that came to the conclusion that yeah, the democracy exists, except it's completely ineffectual, and the people who actually rule the country is an oligarchy, right? And so now that excrement's about to hit the fan, they want to, put everybody in chains, maybe digital chains, but once they introduce, like in Britain, digital IDs, and then they introduce digital currencies, central bank digital currencies, make them programmable, then all your life's comforts are going to be dependent on you being compliant, being within the system. And if you want to be free and be off the grid, sure, but you're going to have to be eating roots and roadkill. But for all the other things, and they want to make sure that it's as much of all of the life comforts will depend on their matrix. And if you're a good little soldier in their matrix, well, okay, then you may live. If not, they can, with a flick of a pen or touch, with a click of a mouse, they can basically disenfranchise you completely. And so they're trying to do that, and they're working on it very busily, and they don't want no Trump to derail this for them.
Yeah, it's amazing. I flew last week, and the amount of people that were allowing themselves to get facially recognized as they were going through security, and everything is just over time it gets normalized. I think I was the only one that opted out of it as I was heading through TSA, and and I've talked about this, in terms of like the digital control. I mean, the foundation is there. I mean, people are just glued to their phones. I was running this morning, Alex, and there was a guy. Looked older than me. He's staring at his phone as he's crossing the street. He's crossing the street. He's not even paying attention to the cars that could potentially hit him because he's so
Well, if they hit him, it's going to be their own damn fault.
right. I mean, but this is where we're at. People are so
Yeah,
sucked into these devices, and
yeah,
I think people are going to comply. I mean, it's like the whole thing of after 2020, people are like, oh, they'll never fall for that. I'm like, well, no, they might not fall for that particular example of a virus, but the other stuff, like what we're talking about, I think they'd go for it all day long.
yeah, yeah. Because they impose these restrictions, but they're very, very soft at first. There's actually no restrictions. They just put some rules into place, and they make it. Like for example, I think in Europe, I'm not sure if this is a particular country like Croatia or if it's Europe in general, the number of ATMs has decreased by about 15%. So they're like gradually removing the ATMs. They're making it harder for people to get cash. And then they're going to introduce this central bank digital currency, and they're going to say like, oh well, look, if you just log in here, then everything becomes so much easier. Like you have like one login, and then like to pay these bills and those bills and get a doctor's appointment and register your car, it's all super easy. If you want to do it the old-fashioned way, sure, you have that choice, but maybe you have to go drive 10 miles down the road or 50 miles to do that in person and on a counter. So people will say like, wow, this is so much easier. I don't have to do that. And the other thing is going to fall into disuse. And people are not going to be drawing cash from the ATMs anymore, and they're going to get used to not paying cash. And so once everybody gets used to it, it's kind of like all the fish is in the net, then they're going to lift it. They're not going to show their hand before everybody is in, and then they're going to feel like, oh, by the way, we're going to have to do something about this red meat consumption, because it's really, really bad for the planet. We can't have that. So you're going to have to be, like you're going to get so many ounces a week per family member, per household member. And then, if you try to buy more, well, the purchase is going to be declined, and, we're going to suggest that you go with crickets instead. And so, if people opt into the matrix, then all of these things that are coming are only a matter of time. And never forget, they regard us as hackable animals. and that's where it's going. And not only that, everything is, you can opt out of everything so long as you're limited to the phone, because the phone, you can leave it behind, you can lose it, you can throw it in the river or whatever. What they want to do is they want to chip us, right? The technology already exists. And once you have a chip under your skin, well, then, it's like the pre-crime. You can't get rid of it so easily. And everywhere you go, everything you do, all of it is monitored, and you can't opt out anymore. But, they're not going to announce this tomorrow. They're not going to introduce any restrictions tomorrow. It's going to all be gradual. But if we opt in, if we just kind of um, go along because it's easier, because it's more convenient, we're actually leading our children by the hand into slavery. We're delivering our own children into a future that's not even worth living in. So I think that for their sake, for the sake of future generations, we have to resist this like hell.
Well, and you also, like in terms of the meat consumption, one of the things that you've noticed now, at least in my brief experience of paying attention to this, they go back to the one card, that they keep referring to: mask versus anti-mask, right? Gene therapy versus anti-gene therapy, Semitism, anti-Semitism. Oh, you're not supporting Israel. You're an anti-Semite, right? Oh, you're
Right.
not where you don't want to protect grandma, right? You're an anti-mask or an anti-gene therapy. I still don't know if we can say that word from a YouTube standpoint, but but this is what they'll do from the meat consumption stand. They'll use that as well. They'll go right down there.
Yeah.
Oh, Alex, you're killing cows. Oh, you're destroying the environment. Oh, we need to shame people publicly again because they're buying too much of it to kill the businesses, the small businesses, or these big grocery boxes. They'll just have less of it available, and that's the easier play for them to do. Just make life so uncomfortable and inconvenient, and just take an option away or reduce it down.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, 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 correct. And they, if unchecked, if we go along with everything, that's all coming our way. Now, I have to say, I'm not terribly pessimistic, because I've already seen many of their grand designs fail miserably. One of them was the big event of 2020, when they told us that, oh, forget the old normal. That's never coming back. From now on, it's all new normal. And then we were supposed to go with these, sanitary passes, vaccine passports, right? In France, it was called sanitary pass. Without it, you were supposed to not be able to board a train, a plane, go to a restaurant or a theater, or a bus or anything like that. And then, we were meant to be getting whatever quarterly, semi-annual boosters indefinitely. Um, and so that all kind of disintegrated and fell apart, and we're still living in the old normal. Except, we're aware that they haven't given up, and they never will give up until we end them somehow. And then, if people remember the Wolfowitz doctrine and the project for the new American century, that was another one of those grand designs that they announced more than 20 years ago now. And it was supposed to be this new American century where, the United States would have full spectrum dominance over everybody in the world and rule the world, and everybody else had to submit, and on and on and on. And, there's nothing left of that. So, to the extent that these great agendas are based on lies, on unbridled ambition, trampling over people's human rights, whether at home or abroad. Uh, it seems to me that they have a huge tendency to fail, especially if people pay attention to them. And so I think that this will also fail, but we absolutely have to take an active part and reject their agendas loudly and very decisively. Because if we don't, then they win. I think that's the only way that they can win, if we just simply surrender.
I want to shift here, with my limited amount of time with you, to talk about what's occurring in the Middle East and the assets that appear that have been moved in that direction, where it seems that it's imminent that something with Iran could happen. Um, I thought we got rid of, or they got rid of. I don't want to say we because I have nothing to do with this. The United States got rid of all of the Iranian, nuclear facilities this summer, and I was told that I'm anti-American when I dare criticized it. So I thought this was it. I thought it was the ones, dropped a few bombs and we were done. They were done. Excuse me. So what happened,
Um,
Alex?
well, it seems to me that Trump is desperately trying to avoid going to war against Iran. And that's not necessarily because he's such a nice guy, but because going to war against Iran would be absolutely suicidal. Iran is not Afghanistan. The Iranian government and their military they're no Taliban, right? The United States couldn't subdue Taliban after 20 years of trying in Afghanistan. Um, the Iranians have long-range hypersonic missiles that can reach all 22 of the Western military bases in the Middle East. Uh, no, sorry, 60 bases and 22,000 American troops that are in the region. They can reach them all. They can reach their carrier strike groups and sink them. Okay. Uh, what happened last summer was, the World Wrestling Federation equivalent of a war. At a certain point, Trump was no longer able to avoid doing something. When the Israelis went to bomb Iran, and so Trump had to join. He dropped a couple of bombs, launched a couple of Tomahawk missiles, and then declared that the nuclear uh, Iran's nuclear program has been obliterated. It no longer exists. There's nothing left. It's all been turned into dust. And why did he do that? Why did he say that? Because the nuclear program has been the West's justification for going to war against Iran. We're liberal democracies. We're the good guys. We don't go changing regimes, right? The objective has always been the regime change. The nuclear program has been the justification. So if you say that, oh, I completely obliterated that nuclear program, it's no more, it's gone completely, then you obliterate the justification for going to war against Iran. And so, you know, for a few months, Trump's put himself in the clear with regards to that particular project. But the Israelis are again pushing desperately to renew the hostilities with Iran. And, Trump has a problem that, while he does have a razor-thin majority in Congress, uh, the Congress is practically Israeli occupied territory. If tomorrow Benjamin Netanyahu comes to the joint session of U.S. Congress and reads a manual about how to kill Palestinian children, he's going to get 50 standing ovations. And the U.S. congressmen have all those Israeli flags in front of their offices and saying like we support Israel and blah blah blah. So and not to forget the voter bloc, the Christian evangelicals and the Zionist Jews. That's a huge voting bloc. So if the pressure starts building up again to go to war against Iran, I don't know that Trump can politically avoid it. So I think that they're putting, pieces in place, but I think that Trump is hoping to ditch this somehow because it's going, this second time it won't be World Wrestling Federation type encounter. It could be for real. And I read in Haaretz that just to give people to convey the military power of Iran, that one Iranian missile destroyed 28 buildings in Tel Aviv during their 12-day war. The the Israelis were begging for peace. They were begging Trump to make uh, Israel stop. Sorry, to make Iran stop. Iran has they've been sending drones and missiles into Israel for 12 days. They have enough for a continuous conveyor belt that could go on for 2 years, turn all of Israel completely into rubble. They can do this, and they will do this if Israel attacks again. But if the United States joins Israel, they're going to do the same with the American and NATO military bases in the region. Well, NATO, British, whatever is there. There's lots of different foreign troops present on the ground there. They're going to wipe them out, and it can't be stopped. The American power projection, these carrier strike groups, they are they're obsolete. They're simply obsolete in the age of precise hypersonic missiles. There's no defense against them. And they pack such kinetic energy when they strike that they can cut through an aircraft carrier like hot knife through butter. So you no longer have power projection there. It's all make believe and pretend. But if hotheads in Israel and in Washington, D.C., uh, insists on this march to war to confront Iran, then that war might happen, and that's going to be a very bad day for the United States.
Do you see this thing escalating, or do you see it being diffused?
It's hard for me to say. I mean, the Israelis want to escalate it. One thing that we learned, well, I've been asking myself for a very long time, how can such a tiny little country that's from the point of view of defense, completely dependent on the United States and NATO and the UK, uh, they have a small economy. How can they have such a dominant role in the United States politics and in the UK and in Europe, where nobody can even question the policies of Benjamin Netanyahu? Nobody can even say, stop killing children in Gaza. They pack you off to jail. How can this possibly be? What is, and like the standard narrative has been like, oh, the Jews have a lot of money, and they are very well organized, and they are very effective in their lobbying, and on and on and on. But like, okay, fair enough, but the Arabs have a lot of money too, right? So do the Russians, so do the Indians, so do the Americans. So it's something, it obviously has to be something else. And I think that what it is that it's a certain concealed power in the world that has been running the show for centuries now. I think that they have been the main stakeholders in the British Empire. They grafted those systems of power into the United States already a long time ago, but especially after World War II. They created the CIA completely, modeled on the MI6. And we see now that the the uh, the link ups between all these people are starting to surface more and more. So we see that Larry Ellison is very tight with Benjamin Netanyahu. He's an arch Zionist. He's supporting, along with a number of other billionaires. But you can't really become a billionaire in any business just like that. You have to have political backing. And so who is his political backing? Well, we saw Larry Ellison heavily invested in another fraud 20 some years ago, which was called Theranos. and he was on the one of the largest financial backers there. But the board of directors were pretty much the who's who of the American deep state. And then more recently, we find out that Larry Ellison is also very, very tight with Tony Blair. Tony Blair is Mr. City of London. He's the, knight companion of the most noble order of the Garter, which is the highest order, knighthood in the City of London. And he's got his bloody hands in absolutely everything, everything in the Middle East, in Ukraine, in the United States, in all these attempts to destroy X, to take over the U.S. media, um, uh, to to stir up the pot in the Balkans, to introduce the digital ID, the CBDC. He's absolutely. Oh, yeah. He's the eminence grise behind the all these Al Qaeda, Al Nusra, HTS jihadis that have just taken over Syria. He's in absolutely everything. And there you just had Larry Ellison give his organization 257 million pounds, which is almost about $300 million. And so the Tony Blair Foundation or Tony Blair Institute, whatever it's called, uh, they now have 900 staff in 46 countries around the world. And I think that the real power behind Israel is the City of London, because Israel has been the project of the British Empire since the get-go, since the 1800s, and the 1917 Balfour Declaration uh, was written by British Foreign Minister to Lord Walter Rothschild, right? And Balfour was BFFs with Lord Walter Rothschild's son Nathan. And so this is the little cabal that's involved in absolutely everything, including the high tech digital gulag that they are building up for us. Because we had Larry Ellison just a couple of weeks ago talking about, oh, we're going to be recording and monitoring everything. Everybody's going to be on their best behavior because we're going to be, filming everything in real time, and we're going to have AI that's going to be able to intervene in real time. And so you all are going to be digital slaves and hackable animal, and just wait when we figure out how to hack you too. This is all the same network of interest in Israel, in Ukraine, in the United States, in the Silicon Valley, in the City of London. These are all tentacles belonging to the very same monster.
Well, and now controlling interest in TikTok, and then his son, I believe, is running. Is it CBS who just acquired the Free Press and paying Barry Weiss what 100 million and making her the editor in chief of that division?
Yeah, yeah. I think he bought her Free Press for 150 million bucks,
And she's
which,
now she's the editor in charge of the Free Press that's owned by
yeah, yeah,
CBS.
yeah, yeah. Exactly, exactly. So yeah, all of these things, they all seem to come together to the same imperial cabal at the very top of the pyramid. I think that the names, the family names of people who are at the very top are not in public domain. They're not being discussed, but I think we can pretty much, the one name that turns up everywhere where you have rivers of blood flowing are the Rothschilds. And in the United States, you have the Rockefellers. And, the Rockefellers' interests have been absolutely keen on getting a hold of Venezuela and regime changing there. And so I think that that's where the pressure is coming from to for Trump to send troops and try to a regime change there.
I thought it was a real life. I thought we were doing Miami Vice now, blowing up narco boats out in the sea.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is absolutely ridiculous, but the pressure to do that is coming from somewhere. And I remember the big interview with Aaron Russo, who made the documentary film America, Freedom to Fascism, and he was a producer behind Trading Places with Eddie Murphy, my hands down my favorite comedy.
It's a great
Well,
movie.
he was friends with, I think, Neil Rockefeller, who told him, "Oh, there's going to be this event." He was talking about 9/11. There's going to be this event, and then from this event, we're going to launch a war on terror, and it's going to be cool because, there's no real enemy. We're just going to go up around blowing up places and taking over. And we're going to go into Afghanistan, and we're going to go into Venezuela. There you go. So it seems to me that Venezuela is a Rockefeller project, and I think that Trump. It seems to me that Trump's way of dealing with this is to take on the project and then bungle it because this already, this is a rerun of 2019. And in 2019, we had the attempt to install that guy Juan Guaido as the legitimate president, and Trump made all the noises like he was on board, and he actually recognized Juan Guaido as legitimate president of Venezuela. But then he turned over the whole project to two of his biggest flunkies in the administration, John Bolton and Elliot Abrams, who I forgot that he existed. He was up to his eyeballs in the Iran Contras affair, and I think he even served some time for that. And then he disappeared. Like he was not visible anywhere. And then he turned up as he's going to be in charge of regime change in Venezuela. Of course, nothing happened. The whole project failed. Trump said that, John Bolton was the dumbest person he's ever met. So that's who he put in charge of Venezuela. Now he sent, I think, 8 ships, 8 destroyers, whatever the ships are, and something like 6,000 troops up until now. Of these 6,000, ballpark, half of them are going to be crew. So that's 3,000 troops that are actually available for any kind of combat activities. Well, I can tell you, you're not going to get anywhere with that in Venezuela. Caracas is at 3,000 feet altitude behind a high mountain in a valley behind uh, the Avila. I used to live in Caracas, so I know this. There's the Avila Mountain that separates Caracas from the Caribbean Sea, right? And it's a very tall mountain covered in tropical vegetation, right? You're not going to get, and there's one road going up to Caracas. So you're not going to regime change Venezuela with that. You would have to probably bring hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of troops, maybe a million. You're not going to get anything done with 3,000. So it seems to me that Trump again is going through the motions, pretending like he's taken on the assignment, except he already is planning to get an F on that assignment because he's not really keen on that project.
Where can people find you, Alex?
Oh yeah, thank you. So I have 2 publications on Substack. One of them is a daily trend following newsletter covering about 18 global markets, including gold and Bitcoin, with daily trend following signals on those markets. It's called iSystem Trend Compass. My other publication is a personal blog, let's call it, where I publish a bit less frequently, but maybe more thoroughly researched articles and better refined prose. And then it's called Alex Krainer's Trend Compass. And then I also have, I'm also active on X. My handle is @NakedHedgie. That's the 3 main platforms where I'm active.
We didn't even get a chance to talk about gold. It's now north of 4,000 an ounce.
Well, yeah, but what's to talk about? It's up. Whoever's long is making money. Whoever isn't long missed the boat for now. Who knows where it goes? I've never been into target prices. In 1970s, the price of gold went up 24-fold, not 24%. So, if inflation emerges, God knows where we go. Maybe we go to 10,000, maybe we go to 20,000. Of course, it's not going to happen overnight. But, we've been talking about gold for an awful long time, and here we are, $4,000 an ounce.
Alex, thanks for doing this. I look forward to continuing to follow your work and more conversations ahead.
Excellent. Thank you for having me, Mike. Always a pleasure to join you, and warm greetings to your viewers and listeners.
Mic drop.